Hello, candidates. I hope you are all doing well. We're going to do this week a little bit differently to last week. This session is going to be pre-recorded because it is a bit more dense than week one of Australian Workplace Readiness Training. So, without further ado, I welcome you to Module 2, Your Rights and Obligations as an Employee in Australia. And so the placing company is very keen to make sure you guys understand what you are entitled to when you come and work in Australia, but also what your obligations are as well. And that's why we put together this module at a self-paced learning style, because it is a bit more dense and might take time to digest this. One of the reasons as well why I sent out the pre-module questionnaire was to gain an understanding of what your particular concerns and interests were in relation to this topic. I wanted to know what you were nervous about when you thought about coming and working in Australia, what you were excited about, what your expectations of a workplace were, and then addressing within the context of our legislation, contracts, and practices in Australia, how those are met. And so the discussion today is going to be within the context of the visa the vast majority of you will be coming to Australia to work with, which is a sponsored visa 482. There will be an assessment available for 2 weeks after this has been posted as well. So please complete the assessment. I'll provide any feedback as we go through it. But yeah, the intention is that this will be very much a tailored module to the responses you guys all sent through, and hopefully allays your concerns a little bit. So at a high level, I'm just going to start off with a bit of a summary of where your rights and obligations sit. So as a sponsored visa holder working under a 482 visa, the Fair Work Ombudsman in Australia and the Department of Home Affairs, as well as the Migration Act and the Fair Work Act, are the primary tools and instruments that guarantee your rights and your obligations while working here in Australia. So things that this include are you're provided with equal pay to someone else who's an Australian working in the same organisation, in the same role or similar role. That you are only required to perform the duties associated with your approved role on your visa. That you are not made to pay for the expenses of your employer in hiring you. That you do not work as well for any other employer in accordance with your visa conditions. And you are paid in a manner which is verifiable by any other independent person. So you can't be paid under the table. It all has to be official, associated with the tax file number, such as an electronic transfer, something along those lines. The other key document, which applies to your employment, is what's called the National Employment Standards. We'll delve deeper into these later. But some of these things that it guarantees are the maximum standard working hours per week that you can do, the rights that you have to receive 4 weeks of paid annual leave, 10 days of paid sick leave, other compassionate leave, and then also the entitlement to accrue long service leave. Usually that applies in Australia after about 7 years, could be 10 years, depending which organisation you're working for, and then you get 3 months of paid annual leave. The contributions to superannuation, that's essentially in Australia, for every amount you're paid, a set amount is set by the government or your employee contract about how much the employer will contribute on top of that to your retirement fund, and we'll help you identify all of that. That you've received statements of fair work and what your entitlements are, and understand what your rights are as an employee. And so we've seen as well with some of the candidates who have received job offers so far, it's not just your employment contract that you will receive. There are a whole lot of other documents that come with it. These include the organizational chart of the uh, facility, also their enterprise agreement that has been bargained with all of the staff and the representatives of the staff at the facility, and we'll dive into those a bit more later on. Get your work contract, and then also a statement of benefits, things that they're doing above the ordinary in order to assist you in coming and working in Australia. So there are plenty of details that you'll be receiving to give you a lot of clarity about your specific workplace. So with that in mind, what I would like to do next, after that quick summary, is run through a few of the key insights from the survey, just so you can get a bit of an idea of what other people were thinking when you filled in the survey as well. So some of the key insights were, it is pretty much unanimous that a supportive and inclusive work environment is really important to everyone. And that means quite a few things, but nevertheless, what we are looking for is a workplace which is encouraging, which is welcoming, and that is something that we've seen reflected back to us as well from employers, that they want you guys to contribute to, that they feel they have these sorts of workplaces already happening and they want to welcome you into that. So that's really encouraging. The top values in a workplace that we saw were recognition and reward for good performance. This was something that people really valued, and we are conveying onto employers as well, that if you're doing a good job and you're putting in the efforts with whatever role you're doing, that you should be rewarded for it, should be recognized, and your management team should be aware of it. So we'll be passing that on. Fair and equitable treatment. That is a very, very big one here in Australia, and we can completely understand that you guys as well want to make sure if you're moving to the other side of the world by your employer, you're going to be treated fairly. And you are going to have equal opportunity to be able to advance and grow and treated like others in similar roles as well. So yes, that makes a lot of sense. And then opportunities for training and development. And it's great to see this ambition coming across the board, really, that you guys want to use your opportunities here to advance and to grow. And that's also something we're passing on to the employers. The primary concerns about working in Australia were the adjustment to a new environment and culture. So this is something, again, we're passing on to employers, but it's also why we're doing the Australian Workplace Readiness Training. We want to be answering your questions before they come up. And I know last week, a lot of questions came after the module about just arriving in Australia and getting set up. And what the purpose of today is to give you an understanding of, okay, if you're working in Australia, what are you entitled to? What if something goes wrong? What is your employer entitled from you? And giving you that clarity. The other primary concern that was expressed were visa and legal issues. And again, that's why we're here. That's why we're really going in depth about all of these things to answer these questions and give you a really strong foundation about what your rights and obligations are. And now we'll cover some of the, there we go, turn down the volume. Some of the expectations that were reflected in the survey. So the main expectations are in coming to Australia that you will have better pay, job stability, and a satisfying and supportive working environment. And that definitely is the motivation of Australia as well. You should be paid the same as an Australian in the same job. That is part of the law. And oftentimes that is a higher wage than what is available overseas. When it comes to job stability, your employer is signing you up for most roles on this visa. It's going to be 4 years minimum. And so you're going to know where you're working, going to know where you're living. You're going to have stability and can plan your life around that. And hopefully, the jobs that we're putting you into do tap into being satisfying and supportive. We really do meet with our employers and the team and assess the culture. And I know Michael Barrell as well has been really impressed with the culture and the openness and the welcoming every employer that we're meeting with has been expressing about working with you guys. So aspects that are lacking in previous workplaces, these tend to be transparent communication and management. And that often happens in workplaces. It's something that we all grapple with and every workplace is trying to improve on. And so we'll dive into in a couple of modules time some of the ways that that can be communicated in Australia and how that works. Effective measures against workplace harassment and discrimination. That is a very serious one if that was lacking in previous workplaces. And so, what we'll dive into during this session are some of the legal protections in place here in Australia to help you against harassment or discrimination. But these are two things that are taken incredibly seriously in this country, and it should not happen. I won't say that doesn't happen, but there are methods then to be able to get recourse, have this addressed, both internally and externally. And of course, and I'll reiterate this many times during the session, you have us here at the Placing Company. Michael has a lawyer's qualification. I'm a lawyer as well by trade and background. When it comes to these sorts of things, we're here to advocate for you. We are on your side, and we will be making sure we're taking as best care of you as we can while you're in this country. But yeah, that sort of discrimination is just not on in Australia, and harassment is not on in Australia. So, in terms of key quotes from the survey, there were concerns about adapting to a new environment. There was a lot of nervousness about adapting to uh, what life could be like here and what the people will be like here. And just speaking generally, in Australia, our workplace rights are very, very clear. And the law is really structured around keeping a workplace very open to new ideas, new people, and building culture around that, which is supportive. And so, especially in the industries that you guys are going into, you'll find that there are just some really amazing people to work with, lots of knowledge to benefit from as well. And again, we're meeting with the teams who are going to be welcoming you in. And Michael and I have been even surprised at just how incredibly welcoming they are. And I know some of the candidates that have been through interviews as well already have been quite amazed at how welcoming these groups are. So I'm excited for you all to get to experience that. Regarding expectations of work, similar things were reflected as before, better pay, stable jobs. So yes, we've covered that. Recognition of good performance, fair treatment, and opportunities for professional development very well valued. And they have been lacking according to a lot of the responses that we received. So we'll definitely be passing on that information. So there being a supportive, inclusive environment, yes, very important, and we've discussed that. One of the major insights that we got from the survey was concern around language and communication barriers. I want you guys to know that everyone who has made it to this stage has got here through a selective process. The Placing Company hasn't said yes to everyone who we've interviewed, far from it. And there have been reasons along professional skills, experience, and also English language skills, which have meant that people might not be ready for the program yet. And by meeting with you all, having our pre-screen interviews, having our in-person interviews, and talking with you guys, we genuinely believe you guys have the language skills to be successful in these roles. Otherwise, we wouldn't be advancing you to this point. And there are different English requirements for different roles and different advancements. We know our candidates who are going to be going for their registered nursing certificates, by the time they go to that point, they're going to have to use 7.5 in English. We're going to be helping them along the lines of getting there. But I'm pretty sure most people, in terms of an IELTS test, who are on this call at the moment are 5 and above. And conversationally, I think you guys are really, really strong. Reading and writing, not so sure, haven't tested that. You guys know better than me. But in terms of being able to get along with your colleagues and to be able to engage with them and be social with them, I don't think you're going to find any big challenges. Probably the main one to get used to, and I know this has been a challenge with Michael Barrell, and he's aware of it too, is the accent can be a little hard to decipher. And my brother-in-law as well, he's from overseas, was on the phone with the airline Qantas this morning, and he was struggling to understand even a bit of the Australian accent. It's just something to get used to, and you'll find just after a week or two of spending a lot of time with Australians, your ear will kind of tweak to what the accent is and how letters are pronounced in this part of the world. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And legal and visa issues were the other concern. Hopefully, last week's module really helped out with that. Okay, now let's dive into the substantive stuff. So we know the concerns that you guys have, the interests you guys have following the survey. Let's jump into now what are the sources under Australian employment law of your rights and your obligations. So number one is the Fair Work Act of 2009 in Australia. So it pretty much covers most Australian employees, and it includes provisions about unfair dismissal, industrial action, terms and conditions of employment. And it also established the Fair Work Commission and the Fair Work Ombudsman. And so these two services where someone would go if there is a workplace dispute, if there has been harassment or discrimination, or someone been underpaid, if an employer hasn't met their obligation, you would go to the Fair Work Ombudsman, who would then conduct an investigation and give a result. And this is a free service to avail yourself of to help protect Australian employees against unfair practices. And so already it's quite institutionalized that there are guarantees that if the government has made certain regulations, there should be an ability to raise an alarm if those are not being properly maintained, and have an enforcement against those. And so that's taken very, very seriously in Australia by all employers. And it's the Fair Work Act is really the number one overarching principle in Australian employment law. The next one is the National Employment Standards, and part of the Fair Work Act, and this contains 10 minimum employment entitlements that must be provided to all employees. And that covers areas such as hours of work, leave, annual leave, parental leave, personal leave, public holidays, termination, redundancy pay. All of that is included at a national level and very much structured. So we've got a floor where nothing could be lower in terms of rights than what the national employment standards are, but it can be better. So at least that way you know what you're going to be getting, be it the 4 weeks of annual leave, certain award rates and stuff like that. And that brings me on to the next point, modern awards. So not as in a medal or something like that. That's our term in Australia for pay rates. So they're legally enforceable pay rates and conditions of employment for particular industries and occupations. And a huge number of occupations are governed by modern awards, and essentially that will set the minimum amount you can be paid for a certain job. And so, again, at a legislative level, you have guarantees in place about how much you're going to be paid. From the employment letters we've seen going out so far, our employers are paying above the award. Employers are entitled to do so. That is their choice. but they cannot pay below the award. And that's how the system has been established. So we've got the floor, and then you can work your way up from there, should the employer choose. One of the way workplaces make themselves more attractive is through going above and beyond what the award guarantees. And one of those things, the tools that is used is called an enterprise agreement. This is where the employer makes an agreement with all of its employees for what the minimum structure of the employment is going to be within their organization. And so if you become an employee of the organization, you are going to essentially get access to the rights under that enterprise agreement. So that can include dispute resolution, pay rates, access to uniforms, or all sorts of things. And so we've seen as well with some of the job offers that have gone out, the enterprise agreement, if that workplace has one, will be sent out with the employment contract and forms part of the agreement with their candidate. So that is just another layer of protections that you guys are getting if you come into Australia. The next one are our Work Health and Safety Acts. And in Australia, occupational health and safety is absolutely massive. We have very robust programs on a state level. Every state has its own legislation and requirements, but every state has robust legislation and requirements when it comes to occupational health and safety. And your workplace has a lot of obligations on that as well to provide you with a safe place to work. So in that way as well, you can rest assured, regardless of what industry you're working in Australia, if you're at the mines, like I've worked at, if you're working in hospitals, if you're working in an office, the protections and the regulations around how a workplace must behave, how it must treat you, the environment it must provide, the safety it must provide, are world bleeding. Australia does that incredibly well. And finally, the last source of law which will be applicable here are anti-discrimination laws. And we have federal laws and state laws that make it unlawful to discriminate against a person because of their race, color, sex, sexual orientation, age, physical or mental disability, marital status, family or carer's responsibility, pregnancy, religion, political opinion, national extraction, or social origin. And again, in Australia, this is taken incredibly seriously. If there was an instance of discrimination, that is something that would be reported very, very quickly, and it certainly wouldn't be tolerated. Australia really prides itself on being very collaborative, very flat. Everyone who comes here, everyone who is here has an opportunity to grow and to contribute to society and receive the same benefits as any other person would in that position. So, in summarizing then, what the key rights and obligations are for you guys, let's start off with your rights. So you have a right to fair compensation for your work. You have a right to a safe workplace. You have a right to leave entitlements and holidays. You have a right to fair treatment, and you have a right to privacy. And privacy relates to personal information that you guys give to your employer that they hold on your behalf. In terms of your obligations to your employer, you must comply with the workplace policies. You must comply with performance expectations, any notification requirements that you have to give your employer about bank details, tax file number, superannuation details will help you with all of that, must be communicated. Confidentiality and respect of intellectual property of the employer. And finally, workplace behavior. It's very much if everyone is adhering to the workplace health and safety rules, the anti-discrimination laws, all of those sorts of things, the things that you wouldn't want done to yourself, or you wouldn't want yourself exposed to, you wouldn't do to others as well. And that's usually a pretty sound way of avoiding getting into any issues there. So when we think about the concerns in the survey about coming to Australia, and what was reflected about the issues that there could be. I want to address them one by one and just go through how we look at those in the context of what we just discussed, what protections there are, and where you guys should look if you're looking for more information beyond us. So, firstly, adaptation to new work environments and cultures. So, the Fair Work Ombudsman provides resources and support to help migrant workers understand their rights and the Australian work culture. Employers are encouraged to foster an inclusive environment that respects diverse backgrounds. Additionally, the anti-discrimination laws protect employees from workplace discrimination based on race, age, gender, and other factors. When it comes to concerns around legal and visa issues, for 482 visa holders, employers must comply with specific obligations under the Migration Act, which includes providing equal pay to Australian employees, the same as migration employees in the same occupation, ensuring visa holders only perform duties related to their nominated roles under the visa, and covering reasonable travel costs for leaving Australia if requested. Importantly, only the Department of Foreign Affairs can cancel visas, not employers, and this provides an additional layer of job security for visa holders. Transparent communication and management in the workplace. The Fair Work Act mandates that employers must issue understandable pay slips and maintain open lines of communication. The National Employment Standards provide clear guidelines on work hours, leave entitlements, and other rights which must be communicated to employees upon hiring, and you will receive, as part of your pre-employment packs, details about your rights as an employee. Recognition and fair treatment. The Fair Act supports fair treatment and includes provisions against adverse action, unfair dismissal, and discrimination. Modern awards and enterprise agreements provide further clarity and enforce standards on pay, working conditions, and dispute resolution, ensuring fair treatment across all industries. Support for professional development. Many modern awards and agreements include provisions for training and career progression. Additionally, the right to request flexible arrangements can support personal and professional development needs, and these can be particularly beneficial for migrant workers balancing new work-life environments and also the pursuit of study. A supportive and inclusive work environment. Beyond compliance with anti-discrimination laws, the Work Health and Safety Act requires employers to provide safe physical and psychological work environments. This includes addressing mental health and ensuring the workplace does not contribute to undue stress or mental health issues. And finally, pay and superannuation. Employers must adhere to minimum wage laws and make superannuation contributions, providing financial security and retirement benefits to all workers, including 482 visa holders. So what do you get under your visa is then an important question. So equal pay and work conditions. 482 visa holders are entitled to the same pay and work conditions as Australian citizens or permanent residents performing the same work at the same location. Employers must ensure pay equity and may not discriminate based on visa status. So this is covered by the Fair Work Act and also the Migration Act. Role-specific employment. Employers must only require 482 visa holders to perform duties that relate to their nominated occupation. This protects visa holders from being assigned unrelated tasks that fall outside their area of expertise and visa conditions, and this is guaranteed by the Migration Act. Travel costs coverage. If requested in writing by the visa holder or their family that the employer is required to cover reasonable travel costs for the visa holder and their family to leave Australia. So If you decide that you no longer want to work in Australia, you want to have your visa cancelled, your employer will get you a ticket to your home country. And this is covered under the employer obligations under the Migration Act. Workplace rights and protections. Like all workers in Australia, 482 visa holders are protected under the Fair Work Act, which includes entitlements to minimum wage, various types of leave, and workplace safety, and that's guaranteed under the National Employment Standards and Fair Work Act 2009. Superannuation or retirement benefits. Employers must make superannuation contributions for the 482 visa holders, just as they would for any other eligible employee, ensuring retirement savings are contributed. And this comes under the superannuation guarantee laws as well as the Fair Work Act 2009. Protection from unfair dismissal and discrimination. Visa holders have the right to seek redress for unfair dismissal and are protected from discrimination based on race, sex, age, disability, or other attributes. This comes under the Fair Work Act and various anti-discrimination laws at a federal and state level. The right to join unions and collective bargaining. 482 visa holders can join trade unions and participate in collective bargaining, providing them a platform to negotiate better work conditions and wages. This is protected under the Fair Work Act 2009. For many workers as well, who are coming in caregiving, for instance, you will have a mandatory meeting within 7 days of starting work in Australia with your representative labour union for caregiving too. And that's part of the labour agreement that we established with the aged care provider, the union, and the federal government, which enables you to come to Australia utilising your NC2 qualification if you're coming from the Philippines, or your PCL qualification if you're coming from Nepal. Okay, and workplace safety. Employers must ensure a safe working environment in compliance with work health and safety laws, which is equally given to all workers, including those on 482 visas. This comes under the Work Health and Safety Act. And finally, the right to work exclusively for your employer. 482 visa holders are typically restricted to work only for their sponsoring employer unless they have obtained specific authorization to change employers. The conditions of the 482 visa, as well as the Migration Act, are the things that support this. So now let's take the flip side. That's what the employer must do for you guys. Your obligations as a 482 visa holder. So under the 482 visa, you must only work for your sponsor. And that's similar to what I just mentioned before. Maintain your visa conditions. Hold valid visa documentation. Meet the health and character requirements. Notify any change of circumstances. That could be address, passport details, family, things along those lines that do impact the visa. Participate in any required training. Adhere to workplace laws and safety, and also undertake tax compliance in Australia. Importantly, no unauthorized work is permitted. Visa holders are not permitted to undertake work for an employer or an occupation other than what has been given as part of their visa. This ensures that the employment terms approved by the Department of Home Affairs are adhered to. So that really brings us to the end of the substantial part of this session. There's a lot to digest in all of that. And I know there was some repetition, but in terms of the primary concerns that you guys have had about cultural adjustment, safety, specific fears around being in Australia, just general anxiety of moving, I hope that provides you with a bit of detail about what is expected of you and what you should expect of your employer and how Australia guarantees that. There is a huge infrastructure behind that. Literally, these laws are hundreds and thousands of pages long, along with their regulations, as long as their explanatory memorandums, as long as their guidelines. But at a very high level, those are the things that you guys should be aware of when you think of coming and working here in Australia. As always, I want to highlight that we are here for you. The placing company is here to make sure you guys get the experience in Australia that you're entitled to and that you're expecting. And that includes your pay, your entitlements, and being in a workplace where you're not discriminated against, not harassment. And then on the flip side as well, we really want the employers to get to enjoy all the benefits that you guys bring too. So it is an exciting time. It is hopefully encouraging for you guys, knowing that it's so many different levels in the legal system in Australia. Your guarantees, your entitlements are really enshrined, and you get to come here and work, even though you're not a citizen yet or a permanent resident, and get the same rights as someone who is a citizen or a permanent resident, and get the same pay as the other people who are working in the same place, in the same role. That is a huge part of really walking the walk, and rather than just talking the talk. If we talk about not having discrimination, then there can't be discrimination based on pay, for instance. You deserve equal to the people performing the same job. And so that's how the government has really tried to show people coming into the country we really mean what we say. So I hope that has been useful. I know there are going to be lots of questions, so please reach out to me directly through WhatsApp, Facebook, or through email. You guys know I'm always online. I'm going to be sending out an assessment as well. Really excited for the next session. I think Michael Barrow will be jumping in to provide the training on the next one, which is going to relate to interviews in Australia. And so it's going to be a really fun one. I know this one's been a bit heavier and a bit denser, but I do hope that that has provided you guys some comfort, especially seeing from the survey the concerns that have been had. This is sort of information that's just really concrete, really rock solid. You can look it up independently, read more about the Fair Work Act, Fair Work Ombudsman, national employment standards, the anti-discrimination laws in Australia, workplace health and safety laws in Australia, and get a feel for just how broad these things are and how established they are too. So with that in mind, I thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead.